HP and Vivid Worldwide experts deliver amazing applications with confidence now around Agile and DevOps. Next slide, please. And today's webinar is brought to you by HP Software. Next slide. Today's webinar is hosted and moderated by Todd DeCapua. Todd is a local user group and special interest group leader for Vivid. He's also a senior software executive with HP Software. Next slide, please. We have three wonderful presenters today. The first presenter is Paul Peisner. He is the Business Development Director at CollabNet. Our second presenter today is Russ King. He is the Vice President of Product Development with Results Positive. And our third and final presenter today is Todd DeCapua, who is also moderating. I'll introduce Todd again. Todd is a senior software executive with HP Software. Next slide, please. Just a few housekeeping things to go over before we start. Today's live session is intended for all Vivid members. The webinar recording will be posted in the webinar section on the Vivid website and will be visible for all Vivid members. Additionally, today's slide deck and webinar recording will be made available to you. We will send you the link via an email once they are both posted to the Vivid website. If you have questions as we go along, be sure to please type them in and send them in using the questions pane in the webinar control panel. And on the next slide, you will see a picture of this webinar control panel. And this will usually appear in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. To submit a question, make sure the questions pane is expanded and type in your question and click on Send. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll pass it over to Todd.
Great, Stephanie. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I really appreciate Paul and Russ joining us today to go ahead and cover this Delivering Amazing Applications with Confidence Now, and they focus on Agile and DevOps. This is the third of a three-part series. If you have not caught all of them, you could go out to the Vivid website and find them there. I'm also writing blogs on the Future of Testing blog on the HP website as well. I know that Paul and Russ will also be leveraging blogs and social media to get the results of this out as well. The format that we're going to follow, just to help you kind of understand, is this is really kind of think of it as a conversation that Paul and Russ and I might typically have at an event like HP Discover, where we'd be hanging out in a bar and really looking back and what are some of the past trends that we've seen, what are some of the present challenges that we've seen, and what are some future thinking ideas that we're also thinking about. So with that, we will also have 4 polls throughout this, so I encourage all of you to participate. I'm hoping that within about 30 seconds everybody can get their votes in, and I will be sharing the results not only in this webinar, but also in the blog, and something that you could share with other people with these results. So as we move to the next slide, I think it's important that I go ahead and share a little bit more specifically around HP, what the vision of HP is, being able to enable every customer to deliver amazing applications with confidence and do that now. Some of the things that we're helping these customers to focus on are quality, automation, virtualization, and also leveraging big data. So as we look into getting into the meat of this webinar with you, really on the next slide, you'll see this, I love calling it a high-level vision slide of, hey, we're looking at things like past, present, and future. So let's get started with the first polling question. And as we move into this, I will help kind of read through it as you see the question come up on your screen. I would like for you to select one of these responses. And what we're interested interested in learning from you is around, what % of your organization is or has transformed to Agile and DevOps practices. So again, you can see there's 5 different options there that we've presented to you, anywhere from 0 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, 75 to 100, or none. This is not meant to be a huge test. It's really just, we're roughly in and around this range. So again, the reason why, really looking to get a sense for who are the participants today and where are they right now in this transformation cycle. And again, everybody defining Agile a little bit differently, DevOps a little bit differently, especially as maybe you go through this cycle. Again, that's why we wanted to just kind of keep it a little bit general and get some good, quick baseline information. So I can see that everyone has had an opportunity to vote. So with that, it kind of looks like in the lead is the 50 to 75% range of the percentage of the organization is or has transformed to Agile DevOps practices, and then followed by 0 to 25, and then 25 to 50. So, I think the other thing to note here is if we look at 75% and down, makes up a significant majority. There's only 12% that are not included there. So it looks like with the people that we have participating today and responding, again, the majority are transforming, and this could be upwards of 50 to 75% is the majority. I guess, Russ, as we see these results from this quick poll, how does that resonate, I guess, with what you've seen in the marketplace?
Yeah, Todd, I think it's very similar to what I expected and what I'm seeing in the marketplace. Actually the 50 to 75 is maybe a little bit high, but I do see many organizations where we are seeing enterprise-wide Agile adoption and DevOps involvement and starting to automate some of the key components as you talk about that. So the numbers aren't surprising to me. They maybe are a little bit higher than I would have expected based on my experiences, but not super high.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the 50 to 75 might be a little bit higher than what I was expecting. So maybe the people participating in this call are a little bit higher up in that maturity scale and really cooking along. So let's give some of our opinions on what we've seen going on in the past as we move through. There's a few different elements. I'm going to go ahead and share my personal ideas. Then we'll go ahead and proceed with each of us. Russ going next, and then Paul. So as I looked into the past and some of the trends that I guess I've been a big part of, it's really this idea of moving from, and this is going back into the 2000, early 2000, mid 2000 range, a lot of the what is Agile Scrum and people getting their Scrum Master certifications. And I loved the early Mountain Goat software simplicity of this is what Scrum is, to where we are now that, organizations are, evolving and having these challenges of evolving through Agile and, pushing things into the ops and having those challenges. So but my trend and my past challenge that I wanted to highlight is this education and enablement piece, moving from what is Agile Scrum to now, how do we scale Agile within our enterprise organization? So quite simply, that's the perspective that I wanted to share as a past challenge that I've seen and a trend that I'm seeing and continuing to see, especially as it would relate to things like the Scaled Agile framework. So, Russ, I don't know if you want to move us along. You can go ahead and share what your thoughts are here.
Sure. I mean, as I thought about this and went through preparing for the webinar and looking at past challenges or past capabilities with or how organizations were adopting Agile, yeah, I kind of focused it on the Agile Manifesto, and I think that as organizations initially started adopting Agile, it was a starting point for focusing on the individuals and interactions over the processes and the tools of a more waterfall approach, while attempting to address customer collaboration, and yet, initially struggling sometimes badly with responding to change versus following a more traditional plan, and even initially many times not producing working software and or worse or comprehensive documentation. And so as I went through this, I tried to look back at how this has evolved over time with the organizations that I've worked with, and focused it on tools and visibility at a really simple level, saying that, in the past, in the 2001 to 2005 or 6 or 8 or 9 time frame, this was focused on a team or a product who would start to adopt agile methodologies and practices within the organization. And the tool set that they would use would be whiteboards and flip charts and spreadsheets. So I tried to come up with some representations of that in the graphics. And the visibility level was really at the agile team and not much above that. And so, I think as we look at the evolution and get to the further slides, we'll talk more about how the tools have evolved and how the processes have evolved with this, as well as the visibility in the organization and ultimately the responsibility. So Paul, let me go ahead and pass it to you to get your thoughts on past.
Sure. So I'm just going to wrap up just a couple of things. With regard to the poll, this is actually really interesting to me because we train more people on Agile certification with their CSMs than anybody else in the world. And we are seeing a lot of folks that are interested in Agile, but they can't get past a glass ceiling of how do you take a waterfall siloed organization that has 20 years of experience in the enterprise space and bring agility not only to the software management side, but the businesses that depend on software. There's a lot of downstream and upstream conversations that simultaneously have to happen, but as organizations start to talk about it, they either retract 100% because they can't go 100% Agile and they have to maintain some waterfall practices, or they go all in and then have a chaotic stage where half the organization is embracing Agile, the other half doesn't know what to do with that. What we see is a huge trend of the material effort inside of Agile is dramatically changing. Waterfall projects were high risk, very big, almost supernatural acts of coordination between organizations. They put all their eggs in one basket and they spend a lot of time and energy crafting really big project efforts. And at the end of those years, if they were a failure, it would cost people their careers, their jobs. It would be have incredible impact to the bottom line on the organization. What we see with Agile is just a lessening of the risk, allowing people to experiment, explore, fail quickly with almost minimal impact to the larger organizations because the projects are so much different. They're allowed to kind of explore that. From a developer perspective, in my slide here, you can see some of the chaos that they're asked to do a lot of effort on the front side, almost to be handcuffed or held hostage to what's perceived from a developer perspective as bureaucracy to bring their software children to life. They see the operational practices as being a restraint to getting their great ideas into real life. And so it's a cultural change as well as a technology and a process change. And part of it is, if the companies don't have a tolerance for change, it never gets really out of the gates and never gets a chance to be explored based on the organization being very comfortable to staying within a framework of their historic practices.
Okay, thank you.
So now is, and again, Paul, I mean, you're spot on with the results that we saw from that first poll. I think in the second one, kind of leading off from your slide, let's take a look at, and again, please participate with great participation in the first one. The second one here, relative to your organization, when do you see Agile and DevOps being a standard? Again, you can see really quick and easy answers. Pick one that's relevant for you, and then we'll go ahead and show the results here in a little bit. And I think, Paul, what you were speculating on, on your last slide was really, it's not uncommon to wait 1 to 3 years for these enterprise level changes. Being able to go from these big and manual and structured handoffs to, ultimately some sort of delivery into production that's going to help not only from a business value but also your customer. And I know the three of us have worked hard in many different areas to, how is it that we can help that? So, and the answers, I guess, that come back off of this poll will be quite interesting with the people who are participating with us here to see what their, I guess, tolerance in their organizations to be able to transform even at a bigger level of, hey, we want to change the culture of the organization. We want to provide new opportunities for the people. How do we do that? How do we help make that shift for the individuals? How do we, leverage the technology that we need to get that business value out to our customers?
Yeah, and Todd, I would add that executives see this as a huge business advantage and competitive opportunity. Managers find this to be really interesting to bring and attract great talent to their teams. But I think from a practitioner perspective, those that contribute, it's such a foreign project. It's either completely loved or completely foreign, and people don't know how to embrace it or push it forward organically. And managers are left with, it's a great idea, but how do I get my teams on board?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So, Paul, I'm interested in getting your perspective on these results. As I'm looking at them, where the top one is at 32%, where 32% of the respondents said 1 to 2 years. 21% said it's already the standard now. But really, framing out the spectrum, 26% at 3 to 4 years. So, the majority fall here in the beginning. So anything from now to 4 years. Beyond that, we've got 11% at 5 years and 11% never going to happen. So I guess, what are your thoughts, Paul, looking at the survey or poll results here, where it looks like 32% in the majority, 1 to 2 years out, we'll see Agile and DevOps being a standard?
I think that's spot on with the level of industry practices. I know that Boeing had done a survey about the adoption or the certification trainings across the global markets, and what they identified were hotspots of interest where Agile is the standard amongst the engineering communities, and there are other places where Agile is still yet to break in from a cultural perspective. It's not readily available or accessible. It's not talked about openly or explored after hours or in ad hoc conversations. So I do think this really represents the market that is kind of spread across the U.S. as well as the rest of the world, where relative to your exposure or your access or your history, Agile is still something that it's got a short-term benefit for the organization because it's right here, right now. And there are some parts of regionally that just don't have access to trainers, education, people with experience, and it's still very far away. And there's also large global companies that are compliant. They just don't know how they're going to take their non-negotiable compliance, governance, and security issues and embrace something like Agile. It's a complicated question. Everybody agrees there's huge potential, but relative to the nature of your business and your skill sets, it may or may not be that easy as a company to embrace it. And then how do you adapt your existing tools to participate in it to even get any kind of ROI?
I agree, and Paul, I don't want you to go any further because you'll maybe steal some thunder out of the slide that you're going to present in this next section, where I know you're going to talk about this enterprise Agile and DevOps, and what does that mean from a transformational piece. So how about we jump into that right now, and we can look at kind of this present. So again, as we were preparing for this conversation, what we were really thinking about is what are these things that present day we're seeing in the market that people are challenged with? And for me, there's the simple success criteria. So as organizations are transforming, they're looking at, how is it we can measure these results? And I'm actually looking at the questions here as they're coming in too. Not to be distracted here, but we've got some good questions coming in. One of them is actually very much related to this. So as you guys have questions come up, please put them in. I'm seeing all of them, and would love to have some more, but it's been great so far. So these simple success criteria really being kind of this litmus for, okay, we're doing all this activity, but, and this goes across all the different industries. It's out there and everywhere, but people are looking at, what is the quality of what we're delivering? And it's interesting because I think over the years, and Paul and I have talked a lot about this, the definition of what is quality has changed. Who does quality has changed. But again, quality being one of those three simple success criteria that is being measured still, looking at the user experience and then ultimately the time to market. Many different reasons why time to market is important. But again, these being three simple success criteria that I'm seeing. I've got two more slides here that I wanted to throw out just as things that, makes this a challenge. So in the user experience space, and, this one builds a little bit here, and ultimately what I'm trying to get to is, across all of these challenges of you've got all these different devices, OSs, platforms, browsers, then as you keep moving from left to right, again, you've got things like networks, you've got complex backends, cloud hosts, but all these different unknown factors and complexities that are introduced that ultimately will impact your user experience. So then as we keep moving through this, there's other pieces that are impact as we're measuring. So, things like the reputation of your organization or your brand, the revenue stream can be impacted, and maybe you're only making one minor change, but that one minor change didn't foresee that impacting revenue the way that you just did. Productivity of the organization, what is the cost of being able to remediate these incidents? We all have production incidents in our organizations. What is that cost? What things break down? Again, as we talk about things like Agile and DevOps, for me, I have a lot of very practical examples of, something happens in production, a system goes down. That's when it gets pretty interesting from a person interactivity element. So a couple of the highlights here that I like to show, 48% of the users are less likely to use the app again if there's an impact from a quality and ultimately their user experience. Other things, 25% of users will abandon a mobile app after the 3-second delay. That was from a study from Aberdeen. And then 34% will switch to a competitor and are less likely to return, and that was from Equation Research. So again, there's a lot of things that are out there, but I think for me, there's these three simple success criteria of quality, user experience, and time to market, and I wanted to walk through just this one experience of why this is such a present challenge and trend that I'm seeing, and highlighting a little bit more around the user experience one specifically. So I don't know. I mean, Russ, does that make sense? Are these things that you're seeing as well? And I know that you're going to highlight another completely different perspective of this regional Agile adoption. But, when you think about these three simple success criteria and you think about this user experience, what are you seeing?
Well, I mean, clearly, I think that, we used to talk about user UI as what was important to users, and UI has moved to user experience. And that experience, what is a lot more than what the thing looks like. In fact, I think the look of an app now is less important than does it come up in 1 or 2 seconds, and does it simply do what I need to do. And so above all of these complexities, user experience, especially with the apps that are coming out on the mobile devices from consumer organizations and consumer-based apps, have great user experience. And so as we talk about enterprise apps and how we we build those and use those. This all resonates very well that, the challenge of doing and building apps that have good user experience and great performance and zero defects are really pressing organizations because the users are very finicky now. They will absolutely drop an app, and I do it myself. If an app takes more than a few seconds, I'm gone somewhere else to do what I need to do. And so those pressures are all leading to, what we need to do in Agile and DevOps and continuous deployment and automated testing and things like that for the future. So this resonates well with me. As I looked at this from the point of view of kind of where we are today and where the organizations I work with are, they've gone from that very localized Agile adoption to more of a regional where we have multiple teams across multiple products and geographies and projects. And they've embraced now the Agile process, and they're welcoming the customer collaboration because they know in order to get good user experience and good performance, they need that collaboration, and they're fully expecting change late in the process so that they can remain competitive as they build out the applications, but yet sometimes still delivering the working software, and by working software with good user experience and good performance and zero defects. And so, the evolution from the past to where we are today is I see a lot of organizations adopting Agile in what I'm calling a regional adoption type scenario, not across the board. But clearly a lot of that, as Paul mentioned, is based on cultural and kind of legacy systems that there's a belief that don't fit the Agile methodology. We see some Agile tools come into play today, whether they be from HP or others, where the process is managed and you're managing backlog. You do see some automation today. I don't think we see full DevOps automation in a lot of places yet, but we certainly see some testing and build automation getting towards that continuous delivery lifecycle. And the visibility within the organization of Agile is really raised up from just that Agile team to now the product managers understand it, the dev managers, regional managers. And so I think that all of that is changing. And a couple of the bottom slide on here where you have an Agile candidate who drew a very good waterfall methodology and then realized that he was going to work for an Agile company where you just do testing and deployment, coding, testing, and deployment as opposed to all of the other stuff. I thought was pretty representative of kind of where we are today in many organizations that I work with. So Paul, I'll go ahead and pass it to you.
Sure. So, a couple things I wanted just to bring up is, when we engage with organizations, we're honoring the 20 or 30 years of well-groomed waterfall practices that have set up some best practices inside the organization and really kept the company alive and functional when the markets weren't as software dependent and or as quick to change as they are today. The volatility of the market today is really mandating a different kind of engineering skill set, but the best practices in large organizations and the tools that they inherited sometimes are being thrown out and baby with the bathwater, kind of an issue. And what we're finding is that transforming or transitioning organizations into agile enough for your corporation and agile enough for the market that you serve is really what we're focused on. And we spend a lot of time around definition of done issues, where we like to take the pure agilist approach where in the project phase where there's no material impact to the business, we want to see people experiment and explore, get training, learn quickly. We talk about project done, and that's really a cultural change where you're time boxing and estimating what you can get done in a collaborative environment with the teams and the technologies that you currently have in place, bringing in open source technologies without a strategy sometimes actually increases the complexity and challenges of your organization. And I say that, as a company, we support open source. We provide a lot of the coordination between the open source tools. But what I like to do with the larger organizations is incorporate the existing tools and skill sets so that we're not losing the knowledge and the expertise of people that have been in large organizations and have a tremendous amount of knowledge about what happens inside your organization when you do something that materially impacts the business. That knowledge coming into an Agile practice actually accelerates the productivity, and it keeps the learning curve from being slowed up. So we really like to focus on the cultural conversations in the earliest stages, and we get to the automation technology discussions where, just enough Agile integrations so that your tools can remain in place, but oftentimes perform differently. Where we used to have bigger windows for testing, what we want to do is see more testing all the way down the whole life cycle, because you don't know what you don't know in Agile methodologies, and unless those testing tools are constantly in play, the development folks won't have the feedback to know whether they're fast-moving projects, when we call project done. That's a time commitment. That is a minimal testing kind of a place, but when you get the product done, that's an ongoing long-tail collaboration between the traditional testing environments and the security teams and the ongoing performance folks, and it really does leverage the skill sets of the historical waterfall communities to work more collaboratively together to monitor and track those product stages so that they can see trends that maybe weren't a problem in the past, but at scale and with the multiple hundreds of Agile iteratives that are coming out, they tend to build quickly into problem issues. And we call those the product done stages. And then also making sure that you're building the business. When you sign up for a user story, in the past, the engineering teams were hands-free relative to did it perform in the business. With Agile, what you find is that your engineering teams are becoming a bit more business savvy. They're choosing the backlogs, they're able to push them out, and they should be rewarded for pushing the projects and the features and the pulling from the backlog that really change the business in a positive way. They need to be kind of measured on that metrics as well. So we typically see a big push on culture changes, the definition of done being project, product, and business done, and really helping to facilitate conversations across the silos, the historic silos that were essential to a waterfall community, breaking down those silos and building a more collaborative, transparent environment so that the business can trust the software engineering teams and that the engineering teams are more of a collaboration rather than a set of handoff activities that are reactionary and blindsided by a lot of changes. They tend to have that visibility and early dialogue. If the tools work together and are triggering downstream notifications at the earliest stages, you're able to jump into conversations that can help avoid painful learning experiences. So we have this maturity curve that we focus on. Depending on what people are doing in an Agile space, absolutely need to get the project phases first and then start working on the technology coordinations between the tools themselves. Todd, any comments, any insight?
Paul, I love this view, and for me, it's almost the subtitle here: Agile conversations change as it matures and evolves in the enterprise. I know myself personally, I've been a change agent at 3 large enterprise transformations, and this is kind of the I guess the feeling of that culture, technology, change that evolves over time. And I think this is why there's so many coaches that are out there and being employed, not only at a team level, but now we've also got coaches at an executive level, because as people are moving up this and they're seeing this business value continuing to push through the machine, you start to have these different conversations. And again, some of the questions that I'm seeing come in are also very relevant for this conversation. So I think this is an important piece and probably is happening in many of the people who are participating today as a present activity, especially knowing that 21% of them are already there right now. But another some quick math: 58% 10% will be there in the next 1 to 4 years. So, I think this slide does cover some very relevant topics for what's going on presently. The third poll question that we'll move into now is, what does Agile and DevOps include within your organization? So this is another piece that, I think as we think through, how this conversation changes as it matures, this also changes. But it was a question that, we were all kind of thinking through of, well, it'd be interesting to see for the participants today, who are these people and what does it include within your organization? And again, check as many as it apply here, but in thinking through, development environments, test environments, operations environments, business environments, there's been books like the Phoenix Project written where it starts in operations. There's other books that are being written right now where it starts in development environments. So again, depending on that approach, I've also heard, Paul, of a few of these. Russ, I don't know if you've been involved, but where the business is out hearing about things like Agile and DevOps and saying, hey, if this is a way that I can get more value out of the existing resources that I have in place, let's figure that out. But again, being driven from that business perspective. So again, the reason I wanted to make this check all that apply is because depending on where you are and what that conversation is, it could be all the above or it could be just a handful. But I'm interested to see what the results are from our participants today. So as we look at these results together, what we can see is the majority did select all of the above at 54%, but no, these are really interesting numbers. So development and test are equal at 46%, and then as far as operations goes, it's only 15%, and the business at 8%. So clearly, we're seeing the biggest impact coming from the development and test organizations. A few people did select a couple different options here just based on the results, but again, looking at it quickly, that's what we can take away. I guess, Paul, as you think through that, what does this Agile DevOps conversation include within your organization? So development and test, majority, all of the above. A lot of people.
I think the natural two folks that work together, obviously engineering and testing, because you're asking a project-based set of resources to materially, change the way that they work on projects, the size, the scope, and it's just intuitive. We spend a lot of times syncing up the testing tools with development tools because the development tools are so strategic to so many organizations that agility without any kind of concern for quality is just a disaster in the enterprise. In a startup, they can recover quickly and get it right, but in the enterprise space where you've got existing businesses, you can't afford that. So you see a lot of organizations really encourage their development and test teams to work closer together to have strategies where the skill sets, the knowledge, the insights of both teams are working collaboratively to produce similar quality in different engineering efforts. But I do think operations is quickly being pulled into it. I've been at 2 events in the last 3 weeks where the majority of participants were operations folks wondering how their new access to code is going to change their roles and the way that they participate in the Agile team. So I see a dramatic increase in operations teams who are going from proprietary data centers to private and public cloud adoptions and standards-driven automation, and their infrastructure as code, network as code. All of those adaptive moving parts are quickly bringing the operations teams into the same Agile conversations. But I think what we see here in the poll is really reflective, and I think the business is just at a loss in terms of how to take advantage of it. So I do think that's probably the next area of growth in the Agile communities.
Great. So just looking at the time, I want to keep moving along here, and we'll take a look into the future. Please keep sending your questions in. We've got a couple here that we're going to try to cover if we don't get to them throughout the content anyway. So In the future, I mean, one of the bits that I guess I've seen as a challenge, and I'll throw the warning out there, this is a little bit of a product pitch, but I think one of the pieces that when I was running teams that I had a challenge with was being able to get quick and easy access to get performance results back easily. It was not working through depending on how the organization is set up. I mean, oftentimes the developers and testers are working together, but the performance engineering team is still a separate group. But what if I just wanted to get some really quick tests run and get some, quick results to see what this is going to look like, again, just early on in my development cycle? That was a huge question that I had. The other piece is, with thinking about bursts. So, maybe you're doing a healthcare.gov type thing. Maybe you've got, a Black Friday type event, a large sporting event like the American Super Bowl coming up. All of those and above, different promotions on your website, okay, I'm usually running 1,000, 2,000 virtual users, but what happens if I need to go to 1 million or 1.5 million, and I need to do it, get it all spun up in 15 minutes? How can I do that? So this Agile performance testing is something that I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out and thinking about over the last couple of years, and being able to build it in and make it simple. So again, there's something out there in the world. It's very recently released within the last 2 or 3 weeks called StormRunner Load. And again, this answers that question, or at least most of those questions. Very simple to use. It's got a lot of intelligence built into it, and from a scalability perspective, again, to the needs of Agile teams and the broader DevOps teams, something that I think, as I looked into the future, and I've been challenged with this for years, here's one of the ways to answer that question with a simple, smart, and scalable solution. So Russ, with all of that, I'm going to hand it over to you, man.
Yeah, I mean, this all resonates well. The answers to the poll question of the focus on engineering and testing or quality is what I kind of see in the present market. And as we look at where we're going, and I guess half the poll was all of those are part of, including the business and ops. But this whole thing of bringing ops into play, ops in the business, to me, are still, in the majority of organizations, on the waterfall side, where on the front end the business is sort of waterfallish, and on the back end operations is waterfallish, and in between we have development and quality testing happening in a very agile method. And you mentioned performance testing on the previous slide. I think it's similar in nature, where performance testing is happening, but it's happening in sort of a waterfall method at the end of an agile sprint, as opposed to happening as part of this continuous delivery or continuous deployment of the code. So, I think that as I look at where we're headed and where the high maturity organizations are today, is widespread Agile adoption, where you have entire development centers with portfolio level visibility. And I come from a PPM background, and so that's sort of the business side of it. And what I'm starting to see is the visibility and the requirements of the business to be involved and understand the Agile process and understand the velocity and understanding how it's moving through at the portfolio level is becoming a key driver for organizations to effectively execute their application portfolio. So, from my perspective, we've embraced, the high maturity organizations have embraced Agile. They'll welcome the collaboration. They're expecting change, and they're almost always delivering production-ready working software in highly mature organizations. And the tool set has really stepped up to focus on that, and the integrations of the tools, where you have Agile tools and you have automated testing, both functional and performance testing. You have build management, you have traceability, you've integrated with the project and portfolio management solution to get that portfolio level visibility. You have cloud deployment capabilities and continuous integration and continuous delivery and continuous deployment. Now, is this across the board? I don't think so. I mean, I think this is very well versed for certain types of apps and certain types of development, and not so well versed for others right now. But absolutely, I think where we're headed, and the visibility, like I said, all the way up to the portfolio from the business, and maybe even to the CIO of understanding that the ability of Agile to transform an organization and Agile and DevOps to transform that organization and their time to market and their competitiveness is something that really needs to be expedited to be competitive. So, Paul, I'll go ahead and pass it to you.
Yeah, no, I think from a CloudNet perspective, we see what looks like a waterfall practices just being compressed into better practices. But we see with Agile and DevOps two investments that most people don't really see the second one coming. And the first one is absolutely the career promoting adoption of Agile, because it provides so much more value to the business. It is definitely worth investing in, both from a company, a team, and a corporate perspective. There's huge returns to be had. On the other side, there's feedback loops. Because we're moving so much quicker with such smaller projects, folks have been speculating, is there a pattern or a way to build in the feedback loops to improve the quality, even if you don't know what you're measuring or you're looking for until there's adoption or scale issues. And so what we're always looking for and experimenting with is ways to capture feedback loops and what we would get from longer periods of time with the quality in a waterfall practice. Is there a way to build in that continuous improvement for applications that get manufactured in very short windows but have very long life cycles of value for the business as the business changes their market needs, as they change their investments and operations, and they change the architectures? Do those applications have a way of learning out in an operations world and getting that information back to developers and the developing systems, so that you can build in automated tests into the engineering efforts that incorporate the ongoing changes in both the market and the operations environment? So we see huge investments in both pushing and pooling information to make sure that quality is always ongoing and is always getting back to the Agile development teams in wherever the information or the learning happens. And this slide just kind of speaks to that. We get information from people who are frustrated and abandoning applications. We get information from people who can't use the tools, or the tools are working very slowly, and there's a lot of growing frustration. And then we get APM data and performance information from tools that maybe have nothing to do with the application environments, but because of the mobile devices, there's a user experience that is increasingly underserving the needs of the business. And Agile teams won't know that unless they get transparency out to those applications and the way they're performing. And historically, that has not been available or captured or reused in the engineering skill set. So we see it as an opportunity to invent and to build collaboration across the technology environments.
So again, I think both of the perspectives that you guys bring, even though they're a little bit different, we're really looking at a future that, here's some ideas, and I think the ultimate goal here is to have us share a lot of ideas that we've seen from the past, a lot of ideas that we are experiencing today, and then also things that if we were to look into our crystal ball and say, here's what's going to be evolving over time. And I think, Russ, the point that you bring in with this, your background and experience with PPM, and really how does that roll up at this portfolio level, is one that as people go up this continuum that Paul's outlined of this enterprise Agile and DevOps kind of development or evolution, it's playing a key role to bring visibility into, there's one very specific question that I've got staring me in the face, so we will get to that quickly here as well. But I guess I have a last and a fourth poll that we wanted to get your take on. And the question here is, what has the incorporation of Agile and DevOps practices done with your organization? And you can see there's a number of options here. Please check all that apply. But again, as you've heard all of us talk, this idea of, well, we need to bring in some new tools, we need to bring in some new technology, we need to look at some new processes, we need to look at new individual roles and tasks. We need to identify a new success measurement criteria, and really, maybe how do we measure those criteria for success, or it could be all of the above. So again, this is intended to be a pretty quick 30, 45-second, click a couple buttons, and we'll check and see what the results look like. And then, once we see these results, we will be able to move into a few questions here. So I guess, Paul, I know when you and I have worked on a number of things, we see the tools and the processes one, at least from my perspective. I know you are really focused a lot on the individual role and task piece. And I think, Russ, when you look at this overall PPM and the measurement and how does it roll up, that's where this success measurement piece comes in. So we do have the results that we can look at. It's pretty consistent across the board, I think, just based on looking at the numbers. But new processes probably being the highest of the first four, but then 64% of the participants also checked all of the above. So, those results, Paul, how do they measure up for what you would have expected to see?
Yeah, no, it's actually great. It's good to see that the conversations around Agile and DevOps have kind of moved away from the isolating, it's about culture, it's about tools. It's really about both. I think the challenge with Agile is that it enables teams to work at such fast speeds that it doesn't have any way to measure itself. It doesn't know how to establish an ROI. It doesn't know how to kind of grow its business with that practice. And I think with DevOps, it is not about the technologies or about one person doing everything. It really is about a team of people leveraging their corporate backgrounds and histories and expertise to bring all of that into a more collaborative and less siloed specialist roles, into more team-oriented projects that have real business impact, and being able to reward and learn as you work together to go through all of those disciplines instead of just handing things off and contributing in a silo. I think for me this is really healthy in terms of people understanding that it's not about one or the other. It's really about all of those practices working together in a team environment to really help the business.
Yeah, so I guess with this, actually I just had a question here pop in very quickly that let's jump on this one and maybe we can help. So the question is, I don't get the all the above number. How do you get 64% say that they use all of the above and only 27% use new tools and technology? So this really comes down to the calculations and how this gets factored in. So what this would tell us is the 64% is of the people participating, 64% of them did select all of the above. Unfortunately, when this comes through, you're also picking up all the other ones. So think of if you had 5 variables, and then the way that it would be calculated is looking at the total. So the percentage total is calculated on a total. So hence, it's probably easy to say, 2/3 of the total people checked all the above without getting into specifically who that was. So hopefully that adds a little bit of clarity, and you're right with this question. It can be a little bit confusing at first. But the 27% in using new tools and technology, again, the way that I would look at these results would say it looks like a lot of people selected new processes, and then, then the next was probably all of the above as the next highest that those people had also checked. So more than 64% needs be in each of the above. That's also a correct statement. So that came kind of as a clarification from the person who asked the first question. I realize we're getting very close to the top of the hour. Maybe I'll just pick this other question that came in about halfway through. So as we're looking at these questions, and this is one that, when I know Russ's background, my background, and also Paul, this could be a whole nother webinar. But if you must provide a dollar value based on X scope for your project before it gets approved, how do you manage the product backlog ad hoc and ensure requirements are met by that time frame agreed prior to the project being approved? So in my very simple response to this question, again, having done 3 large enterprise transformations, this is a very common challenge that you get to as you're starting to deliver a lot of value within, and this is starting from a development team perspective, because maybe historically in the organization you're used to using project charters and things like that where you have to submit it with all of your estimates and all the ROI and the value from a dollars perspective that you're going to get from that project. And I know that Russ is going to be able to bring in, from a PPM perspective, this is one of the ways that you can get that portfolio level view. And it comes all the way down to, I remember one of my executive VPs grabbed me and just said, you know what, Todd, I have a $5 billion revenue target that I need to hit this year. And this conversation he and I had in September a few years ago. But he just said, Todd, I have, millions of dollars that I need to spend in IT. So let's not tell me about the delays that you're going to have in writing a charter and having everybody submit their estimates and review them and everything else. I trust our teams that they are appropriately putting items onto the backlog, prioritizing them for what our customers need and want so that we can grow our business at the speed that we need to. So let's trust the business analysts, let's trust the technologists, let's trust the developers and the testers. But if I need to invest in a new team or 2 or 3 so that I can increase the velocity of this value to the customer, just tell me how many millions of dollars per team is that going to be and how quickly can we ramp up so that we can increase the velocity of what's delivered to the customer. But that's my perspective. This one question, again, if you must provide a dollar value based on X scope for your project before it gets approved, how do you manage the product backlog and ad hoc? Again, it's a challenge, but I think you're doing it right, and this is part of the pain as you go through the transformation process that you'll see. And I know, Russ will bring that perspective. Paul, I know on the slide where you talked about that transformational curve and the conversations through Agile, that's a big piece of it as well. So, Paul, I don't know if you want to kind of tie this one off. I know we're a few minutes over, but I think it's an important question to kind of help the participants with.
Yeah, so I think it's an early, what we call an upstream and downstream conversation. In the early stages, you need enough experience to become better at doing that. So you need the freedom to make those choices and make those wild guesses in the early stages. I think as you have and experience more success, what you find is management understands what kind of requests really line up with the skill sets of the organization. It becomes less of an issue. If you're capturing that tool with like a PPM tool and it's able to federate the long-term success of similar projects, and you've got project templates in the dev stages that are sitting in library, you know what you can reuse, you know what skill sets you've had success with in the past, and it's a less of an issue when those asks are coming down or the backlogs are getting established and you have known entities as opposed to unknown entities when you're first getting started. So we always tell people in the early stages it is a problem, but as you get mature, it's less of a problem because management already knows historically what the teams are good at if they're saving and monitoring the data with more of a long-tail view of the rest of the organization. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. Russ, do you have any closing thoughts here before we hand it back over to Stephanie to wrap us up?
I do. I mean, I think that we will always be constrained by a budget that comes down that says IT can spend X. And, I think what's critical is you look at the, how do you execute a portfolio of IT spend in an Agile methodology. And I think the question of upfront understanding, what will this cost and what features am I going to get before I get approval, I think eventually will go away as you look at a budget coming down and there's a set amount for strategic spend and there are a set of goals for the organization from an IT perspective, and ultimately it's critical that you're able to start prioritizing that portfolio level and really prioritizing that as a backlog. And I think that's where organizations are starting to mature to take that innovation spend budget and say, we know we can spend this much on innovation, what's best going to benefit the business? And the question of, for this specific project, are we going to fund it and approve it, becomes less of an issue as you mature through that process, because you're going to do the highest priority that's going to provide the most benefit to the business. I know it's a problem now, and I completely understand the question, but I think a lot of it has to do with changing the view of that portfolio and understanding that we are an Agile organization. This is how we execute. This is a velocity at which we do it, and we have a backlog of things that we can build for the business with a certain budget, and let's start through it. So that approval process, I think, becomes less stringent as you start to mature that innovation process in an Agile environment.
And Russ, I guess, what you said just now triggered something that I almost feel like I have to get out, which is, we're talking about Agile and DevOps, but this concept of, measuring the spend versus the return on that or the perceived business value is nothing new, and it has nothing to do with Agile and nothing to do with DevOps. So oftentimes when I would get that pushback from, maybe it's a CFO or maybe it's your finance or your accounting or whoever, I'm going to ask them a very simple question. How do we do that today? And that kind of puts them back on their heels and they kind of look at each other. But quite frankly, I want to understand, let's look at, the last 10 charters that we sent through, and we spent weeks and, thousands of man-hours reviewing and improving and estimating and everything else. How do we measure the value of that today? Because that part doesn't change. If what we're measuring is the work that we're doing and the perceived value to the business and to our customers, great. Let's keep using that same system. That's nothing new. All we're changing is the way that we are doing work. So again, it's something that I have found very interesting to ask some of those kind of open-ended how questions, really to understand more of, well, how are things working today? And yes, this is a critical and important piece that we need to have today and in the future, regardless of the methodology that we follow. So anyway, I know that we're over. Stephanie, I would like to first thank both Paul and Russ for their participation and everybody who was able to join us today, and then hand it over to you to get us wrapped up.
Great. Russ, if you wouldn't mind forwarding a couple slides. There's one that talks about HP Discover. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. So you won't want to miss HP Discover 2014 in Barcelona. It's not too late to register. There's a registration link below that you can use, and the date of the conference is December 2nd through the 4th. It's a wonderful, wonderful event. And the last slide, oh, thank you. All right, it's coming. Just wanted to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Please be sure to complete the short survey following the webinar, and opt in for more information from HP, you will be automatically entered for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card. And just a last reminder that the webinar recording and slide deck will be posted to the Vivid website. And in the next few days, you will receive an email with those links. So thank you again, Paul, Russ, and Todd, for sharing your knowledge and insight into Agile and DevOps today. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Enjoyed the conversation. And I'm glad that you all could join us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.